Thank you for joining us today for the Conformed to Christ broadcast, where we seek to engage the mind, affect the heart, and call people to follow Christ. I'm George Mays, and over here, one-man show, Jay Jones.
Good morning.
You got
I'm switching the camera today.
Yeah, you're doing all of it today, aren't you?
Yeah.
We're missing Larry.
Yep.
You remind me of you remember Mary Poppins?
Yeah.
You remember Dick Van Dyke's character? He'd be like the one-man band.
He's playing. Yeah.
That's kind of
Yeah.
You've got just the whole setup in front of you.
I've got a video switcher. They can't see it. A video switcher. I don't even. What do you call that thing over there?
It's a soundboard.
Our
I guess.
Rodecaster Pro soundboard that records our podcast, makes our sound good, and then this computer that does the program.
All right.
And then I got my tablet.
So if anyone's looking for a volunteer position,
so I noticed you upgraded us to broadcast instead of podcast.
I think I've been listening to too many podcasts.
Yeah.
I got people saying all kinds of catchy little things.
Do you listen to the MacArthur podcast?
I don't.
The preaching one? It's pretty good. You should check it out. Yeah. Just about him. It's called The Expositor.
Yeah.
It's really good, though.
Right.
Yeah.
I just don't listen to a whole lot of I listen to like just some set ones.
Mm-hmm.
I don't branch out very much because I don't have very much time.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got time.
I always got road time.
You've got road time.
Yeah, driving to games. Baseball, softball games, yeah.
But even just driving from your house to the church.
Yeah. I got about 15, 20 minutes. The MacArthur...
I've got about 3 minutes.
Yeah. You could walk.
I could walk.
You could walk on podcast.
Yep.
So this MacArthur podcast is it's kind of like a historical podcast almost.
Mm-hmm.
It's done by Dr. Duncan out there. He's the head of the expository preaching school, I guess you'd call it. Very interesting. But this last one, they called it the sheepdog. And if you listen to the Mars Hill podcast, you'll notice that there's a major thing that's missing, and that was how John MacArthur was trying to... initially, he actually wrote him several letters, handwritten letters in the snow.
Oh, really?
I didn't know this.
Okay.
So the MacArthur podcast fills in the actual stuff that they apparently left out on purpose.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's almost like they're trying to paint like complementarianism as a problem that fueled Driscoll,
right?
In a way. Well, you have MacArthur over here at the beginning. He's trying to, and they read some of the letters he wrote him.
Okay.
Of course, Driscoll blew him off, but then they talk about how they showed up at the Strange Fire Conference,
right?
And so they go into all of that history.
Okay.
It's pretty interesting. It's like the missing podcast that should have been in the
about
Mars Hill. You know what I mean?
Yeah, listening to that, listening to the rise and fall of Mars Hill. One of the things that struck me early on is that they just kind of blow MacArthur off, but they give a lot of time to Rachel Held Evans. So you can already see kind of this liberal bent in it. It's still an interesting podcast. You just got to go in remembering, all right, this is Christianity. Christianity Today is doing it, right? And they've been kind of leaning left for a little while.
Yeah.
And then just understand they've got a bias against guys like MacArthur. They talk about Piper a little bit. In one of their episodes, they talk about the Passion Conference, but they give very little time to these guys that we would say are really sound,
right?
And really solid preachers. But then they talk about all these emergent guys and Rachel Held Evans and people that we would say they're probably outside the bounds of orthodoxy.
Yeah, he wrote him 3 letters, and then after pretty much. It was like a very pastoral from an older pastor to a younger pastor, recognizing he has giftings and he could do a lot of good or a lot of harm.
Yeah.
And so he didn't write MacArthur back for like 6 months. You should listen to it. It's very interesting.
Okay.
And totally blew off MacArthur's kind critiques, what he was trying to call him to. And you can see how he ignored him, and it led to his downfall.
Right.
I mean, he had his crash. But later, MacArthur released a whole series of blogs openly criticizing him.
Okay.
He tried initially privately, didn't work. So he shows up. Of course, this is just self-promotion by Driscoll's part.
Yeah.
To handing out these books. He was there with James McDonald, who also had a crash.
Yeah.
His ministry fell apart. He had a big fall. But what's very interesting is that Duncan talks about how they go into his office. So he preached several times during this conference, MacArthur did. So he's working on some of his notes, and like the security staff's there, key people from that ministry are there, because he tweeted out, Driscoll tweeted out, "I'm going down there," whatever, right? So he's on his way. And he said, like, MacArthur's unfazed. Like, he's like, who cares? He's like working on his thing. I think Driscoll was hoping MacArthur would come out and confront him, right? I mean, just fame and infamy and, all that.
Right.
He'd blow up on Twitter.
Yeah.
MacArthur's like, whatever, I'm about to go preach.
Right.
And then it's like, the way Duncan describes it's like he's in another reality.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, in the grand scheme of history, Driscoll is like a flea.
Yeah.
Compared to MacArthur, like an elephant.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He's like, I'm preaching. He's like, whatever, bye. And then he goes to do his stuff, and he's out here,
Yeah. I think my first time I heard MacArthur criticizing Driscoll was about his Song of Solomon series that he did.
Yeah.
And this was when we were in Kentucky, so I was in seminary. And Julie and I tried listening to that series. Did you ever listen to any of that series?
No.
So here's a married couple in the privacy of our own home trying to listen to this series, and we were like, no, this is too much. Yeah, we weren't able to get very far in it.
Yeah.
It's just, I mean, he's like the shock guy.
Yeah.
And he believed his own hype. And it's real sad the way that his ministry imploded, and without repentance he went down to Arizona and started a new church. And it's even worse now.
Yeah.
I mean, he keeps a list of people that are like on his favorites list at the church. Do you have a list of favorite people at the church, Jay?
No.
You have like a blacklist, little black book. Whenever someone does something you don't like, well, you're going in the book. That's apparently what Driscoll's doing at this church.
Really?
It's very cultish.
People to ignore.
Very cultish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's his style, man.
All right. Well, I didn't think we were talking about Mark Driscoll this morning, but
that's just
that's
a little
just the way that it goes. Yeah, it's an interesting podcast. What's the name of the MacArthur one? Do you remember what the name of it is?
I think it's like maybe just the Expositor, something like that.
Okay. I'll have to check it out.
It's just like a history. This first season is a history of key things, key moments in his ministry.
Okay. I'll have to check it out.
This podcast wasn't really about Driscoll. It was about MacArthur as a sheepdog. And so how he always aims to protect his people from these different influences.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
He's always calling people out, and people always push back against him. You're being too harsh.
Right.
And then he's always proven right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a pattern.
I know. It's crazy.
Yep. It's almost as if he's on to something here.
Yep. Yeah.
All right.
Well, what are we doing
today,
today,
well, let's today's Text Driven Tuesday, and so we're going to be talking about your sermon from John chapter 19. And we weren't able to talk about your sermon at the end of chapter 18 a couple of weeks ago because I was in quarantine.
Yep.
So fun times. I listened to it. Took a lot of good notes.
Awesome.
But didn't get to talk about it. So I thought that maybe as a good segue into what you preached on Sunday out of chapter 19, maybe talk a little bit about chapter 18. And really, I think that we even had a question sent in about Barabbas. And I thought maybe we could spend just a few minutes talking about that.
Okay.
What do you think about that?
Sure.
Does that sound all right?
All right.
Okay, so let's talk about chapter 18 because we're in a narrative, so we don't want to skip over this narrative. So we've got Jesus before Pilate, and that's what your sermon was 2 weeks ago.
Right.
And this is the end of chapter 18, verses 28 through 40.
Uh-huh.
So let's just, we don't have to spend a whole lot of time on
Okay.
it, so we can get to chapter 19 and what you preached on Sunday. But
Right.
maybe just talk a little bit about this. I remember your 3 points. I wrote them down again.
Okay.
Your 3 points. We don't have to go through them, but
Yeah.
maybe just hit on them. We've got the blind guides and camels,
Mm-hmm.
right? We've got kings and kingdoms of the earth, and then we have Jesus and sinners.
Yep.
Okay. So we've got the religious leaders. They've had their little faux trial,
Yep.
like their little mock trial that they've got going on with Caiaphas. Now they're going to take him to Pilate.
Mm-hmm.
But something ironic happens when they get there, right?
Right. Yeah.
And
yeah.
that's where you got that first point about the blind guides and the
Mhm.
camels.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So these they won't go into his like residence.
Yeah.
For
a
because they don't
particular reason.
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
They said they don't want to go in there because they'll become unclean and they won't be able to keep the Passover.
Yeah.
So in their mind, whatever it is, it's not like an uncleanness because there were uncleannesses that you could just go and take care of in an hour.
Mm-hmm.
But there are this kind apparently is like the 7-day kind because I think it's going to make them not be able to celebrate the Passover. So I had to do a little investigation. And apparently this is only based off of pure folklore.
Yeah.
Maybe the law, if you could trace it to one, is that anyone who comes into contact with a dead body is unclean.
Okay.
Right. And the legend is, and maybe there's some truth to the legend, but that Gentiles would kill their children and bury them under their house.
Huh.
Or they'd abort their children and flush them down the toilet. And so thinking that this is the way Gentiles do, they say we can't go into your house unclean. So if they remember, this type of stuff developed over like hundreds of years.
Right.
This is just the rabbinic tradition. This isn't based off of anything in God's law other than you're not to touch a dead body. So you can see again this massive hedge that they've created around God's law.
Yeah. Yeah, you got me on a quite a rabbit trail.
Uh-huh.
Of course, I was sitting in my bedroom, quarantined,
Yeah.
so I didn't have anything else to do. Didn't have anywhere to go. But you got me chasing rabbits because I was wondering, where did they get this? Because even Peter kind of picks up on this in Acts, Acts chapter 10, when he's sent for and he's brought to Cornelius's house, and he tells Cornelius, it's that according to our law, I'm not supposed to even come into your house.
Right.
And I started thinking, where is this? Like, it's not
there.
There's nowhere in the law. The best I could find is in the intertestamental book Jubilees.
Okay.
There's a little section about don't have anything to do with the Gentiles because they're unclean.
Uh-huh.
But again, this was not something that was considered canonical.
Right.
No, there's early list of the books that they considered inspired, and it's our books. It's the 66 books.
Uh-huh.
There was never anything else. But yeah, it seems like, especially after the exile, this is when the Pharisees started to arise. Was after Antiochus Epiphanes and the Maccabean revolt and all the history there. That as the Pharisees arose, they arose out of they had good intentions. They were trying to keep the Jewish nation pure.
Right.
But as you mentioned, they would start putting like fences around fences in order that you wouldn't even come close to violating the law.
Right.
I had a New Testament professor. He said, consider that there was a law that said, don't drink milk. So the Pharisees, they would say, all right, well, in order for you not even to be tempted to drink milk, don't even go down the dairy aisle.
Right.
And then later on they say, well, there might be a temptation to go down the dairy aisle, so don't even go in the store.
Right.
And so you see how they'd build these fences. And so that's what they're doing.
Right.
So that you don't do anything that the Gentiles do that would be, wicked.
Right.
Don't even don't do anything with them. Like have
Mm.
no contact with the Gentiles whatsoever, or you're unclean.
Mm-hmm.
Not according to God's law, but according to the Pharisees and the
Right.
religious leaders.
Yeah, so they're trying to appear to be righteous and obedient, and they're straining a gnat and swallowing a camel. That's why I called it blind guides
Right.
and camels, because Jesus, who is the true Passover, is there. They don't want to go before in the Gentiles' house because they want to keep the Passover, but yet they're trying to conspire to kill Jesus, who's an innocent man.
Right.
So they're engaged in a false trial, breaking
Mhm.
actual Moses' law.
Right.
They're going to kill an innocent man.
Yeah.
They're murderers. They're guilty. They're
Right.
unclean. They're internally unclean already,
Right.
and they're going to miss the Passover.
Right. Yeah.
They're blind guides, and they're straining a gnat to swallow a camel.
Yeah. So so Pilate has to come out to them.
Yep. So he
Right.
goes.
I'm sure
outside
he
to
was
talk to
I'm sure he's in a great mood.
Yeah.
having to come out early in the morning. But then he brings Jesus inside,
Right.
and they have it's not even really a trial before
No.
Pilate.
He
I mean,
just
it's more
kinda
like
asks him
it's more of an
questions.
interrogation.
Right.
Right.
Pilate's trying to figure out: are you a threat to the Roman Empire?
Right.
That's what he's trying to figure out, because that's what they've spun it in a way that Jesus is claiming to be the King of Israel,
Right.
the Messiah. Of course, they know there's theological implications for this, but they're emphasizing the political so that they can try to spin it that Jesus is a threat to Rome, because the Messiah will literally all the nations of the earth are to worship him and like pay homage to him, or they'll be destroyed. So I'm sure they pitched that stuff to him.
Yeah.
Right. And because they want him crucified.
Right.
And so that's his whole deal is I got to figure out what's going on. Like, who are you?
Yeah.
Why do they want you dead?
Right.
And so he investigates him. And in that section, we have the section where Jesus, he doesn't deny that he's not a king. He is a king.
Yeah.
And he makes it clear that his kingdom is not of this world.
Right.
It's not like the kingdoms of the earth, who their power comes from other men. It comes from seizing it via the sword. Jesus' power and his authority comes from another world, and it expands through this world in a different fashion. We shouldn't think he's saying my kingdom's no threat to Rome.
Right.
But the way he does it is wise, right? It is his kingdom will overthrow Rome. So it is a threat. He's a threat to Caesar, but he presents it in a fashion where Pilate will say, "Oh, of course. Well, this is just some religious man. He's no threat to the empire."
Right.
Because he's not. There's no threat of revolt or violence, and so he concludes Jesus is not guilty. He finds no guilt in Jesus at all. There's no reason for him to be crucified.
Right. And then we have Barabbas.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's Pilate's custom to release someone once a year for them.
Mm-hmm.
And he asks them, "Do you want me to release Jesus, or do you want me to release Barabbas?"
Right.
Right. We know the story. They cry out Barabbas. They want Barabbas.
Yeah.
Right. But there is a theological significance to this, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's about as clear as a illustration as you can get of substitutionary death of Christ on behalf of sinners.
Yeah.
So Barabbas is an insurrectionist. What they're trying to charge Jesus with, being an insurrectionist, a threat to Rome. Barabbas is.
Yeah.
He's a militant insurrectionist. He's a murderer. We're told that as well in the Bible. He's a murderer, a thief. Think of him like a mercenary. He's a threat to the Roman Empire. He's an evil man, and he's what they're trying to spin Jesus into being. right. Jesus isn't any of those things.
Yeah.
He's not guilty, and so you literally have a guilty person going free.
Yeah.
While a non-guilty Jesus dies in their place.
Mm-hmm. It's also interesting that Barabbas's name means son of the Father.
Mm.
So you got the son of the Father who is actually guilty,
and
you have the actual son of the Father who is not guilty, taking his place. Yeah. All right. So we are at one of the question that was emailed to us is how does this highlight the fact that the Jewish people are presented with a choice to choose the actual king
Yeah.
their Messiah,
Uh-huh.
or to choose, this insurrectionist who, by them choosing him, they're putting to death their king.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was interesting. You go back to Deuteronomy, and Moses, he tells them, choose this day, life or death. Life or death have been put before you.
Uh-huh.
Choose life,
Right.
right? Jesus has just said, a couple of chapters back, that he is the way, the truth, and the life.
Uh-huh.
He even said in chapter 11, he's the resurrection and the life.
Yeah.
And here's the Jewish people. They're, instead of choosing life, they're choosing death.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Same choice that Joshua gives them at the end of Joshua, right? Choose you this day who you'll serve.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they constantly are giving lip service to God,
Mm-hmm.
while at the same time they're actually choosing that which will bring death upon them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so we just have another example of that, of when they're presented with the choice. They give lip service to serving God. They don't want to go into Pilate's house lest they become unclean and not be able to celebrate their, the Passover.
Uh-huh.
But they're actually choosing death. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Good.
All right, so let's we're at chapter 19 now,
19:1.
and the sermon that you preached on Sunday. So you got it pulled up. You want to read it for us?
So
and
they
then
they demand Barabbas,
Okay.
and then this narrative continues. There's a chapter break here, but really this is the Pilate Jesus narrative.
Right.
So after they demand Barabbas, Pilate, text says, then Pilate took Jesus and flogged him, and the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head and arrayed him in a purple robe. They came up to him saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" and they struck him with their hands. Pilate went out again and said to them, "See, I am bringing him out to you, that you may know that I find no guilt in him." So Jesus came out, wearing the crown of thorns and a purple robe. Pilate said to them, "Behold the man." When the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" And Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him. I find no guilt in him." The Jews answered him, "We have a law, and according to that law he ought to die because he has made himself the Son of God." When Pilate heard this statement, he was even more afraid. He entered his headquarters again and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. So Pilate said to him, "You will not speak to me? Do you not know that I have authority to release you and authority to crucify you?" And Jesus answered him, "You would have no authority over me at all unless it had been given you from above. Therefore, he who delivered me over to you has the greater sin." From then on, Pilate sought to release him. But the Jews cried out, "If you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. And everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar." So when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat at the place called the Stone Pavement, and in Aramaic Gabbatha. Now it was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about the 6th hour. He said to the Jews, "Behold your king." They cried out, "Away with him! Away with him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" And the chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." So he delivered him over to be crucified.
All right. Well, again, this is one of those stories. You especially if you grew up going to church, you grew up hearing this story, and that's one of those dangerous passages of becoming so familiar with it that you lose sight of what's going on. You took this in a direction that I wasn't necessarily expecting, though.
Really?
It's absolutely it's absolutely what's going on.
Uh-huh.
And you discuss the sovereignty of God.
Yeah.
Now, why did you discuss the sovereignty of God in this story about Jesus before Pilate? Because I don't think a lot of people are thinking about that.
Right. Well, what kind of got me thinking about it is first the way that he's treated by these soldiers. Right. They weave together a crown of thorns and they jam it on his head. Now you can think of it in one of two ways. You can think, well, this is just a method of being cruel and mocking it. It has no meaning at all. Or you can see that there is a connection. There is a connection. So you can look at the connection, as we'll talk about, and you can see the connection to the beginning of the Bible as pure random chance. Or I think what is likely is that you see in the connection that God has guided human history in a fashion to where the soldiers do exactly what they did in order to communicate some great theological truth.
Yeah.
So I'm not a fan of luck. I think it's
Yeah.
ridiculous. I think luck is ridiculous.
Uh-huh.
I think it's clear. And then I think also what queued it up even greater was how Jesus answers Pilate.
Okay.
He thinks he's in charge. Pilate thinks he's in charge, right? He's like, why aren't you talking to me? I'm the one in charge here. I have authority to crucify you or let you go. And Jesus answers him, not really. You're really not in charge here.
Yeah.
You're only doing what has been given to you to do.
Okay.
And so that is the sovereignty of God again.
Right.
And then the third one is more of a implication. What can make someone believe in Jesus? Like if these people won't, well, there's only one way. That's if God performs some divine rescue. So I don't know. If that is a good explanation as to my
the method,
the train of thought as I was looking at the passage.
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, I see it.
Yeah.
I see it. And you started out your sermon by talking about 9/11, and I thought that it was anecdotal.
Right.
So I thought that was really good because 9/11 is this massive event in American history. We just remembered the 20th anniversary on Saturday, and but it had a particular impact on the course of your life.
Right. Yeah.
And I find that to be really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. So, when it happened, I was in college. I was a junior in college and getting ready to go down to kinesiology class. And, I knew it was going to impact my life because my dad was in the Army. He was going to eventually deploy. So I knew that was going to happen. He was he'd been around about 20 years at that point, I think. And of course he did. But I didn't know later is that I would go as well. Like I would go into the Army and then I would eventually go. And that, of course, led into a connection, a chain, a history, like a unfolding of events, in my life to where, when I came back, I didn't believe in God, and because of the problem of evil, didn't believe in God, became a nihilist, and that's all due to 9/11.
Yeah.
Right. So, I didn't stay there eventually, but that's the impact that 9/11 had on my life initially, and there's even more as we finish this up.
Yeah,
we'll talk about that, but yeah, and so, but then I had no framework from which to understand that. Many Christians did. I had none, and I'd say a ton of people in the world didn't. So you'd have to just see things that happened. There's no way to process it. Is it pure accident? Is it, is there anyone in control of anything? Does anything, is there any meaning or anything? Is it even wrong what happened? Right? If you're a nihilist, is it even wrong what happened on 9/11?
Yeah.
There's all of these things. If you don't believe in a sovereign God, then I don't know how you process all of these things. And so that's kind of what I was trying to pull out of this introduction is the sovereignty of God, like Spurgeon said, is the pillow upon which we lay our head. Well, that's true if you're a believer and you believe in the biblical God. For a lot of people, they don't, though. Even people that claim to be Christians, they don't believe in the biblical God. And so today, 20 years later, things are very chaotic. The exit from Afghanistan was a mess. COVID's everywhere now. People are dying all over the place. If you ask anybody do you know anybody that died of COVID last week? They're going to say yes. That wasn't the case a year ago. It is now. People are dying left and right. People getting sick, going to the hospital. So things just appear to be totally out of control. So kind of the aim was to present this text in a fashion. You have something that appears to be very chaotic. Jesus has the correct perspective, right? He's cool, calm, and collected because he understands the truth that we're about to unfold, there is a God who is sovereign over everything, human history, evil intentions of men, and even conversion. So Jesus is like the epitome of what Spurgeon said. He's about to have bad things happen to him, and he's totally confident and calm.
Yeah. Bad things have already happened to him by the time we get to this point, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he's already been beaten on.
Yep.
Right. Okay, so we've got 3 points out of your sermon today or Sunday: the King of Redemption, the Son of God, and the Slave Master of Sin. And all of these are going to be connected to that one central theme, the sovereignty of God. Can you give just a brief definition of the sovereignty of God? What do you mean by God is sovereign? Because a lot of people will use that word. What do you mean when you say sovereignty?
God rules the universe as a king rules a land. So think of the old kings. They could do whatever they wanted, and they had the ability to do whatever they wanted over their land. So God rules the universe in that fashion, as a king rules his land. He's free. God is free to do, and he is able to do whatever he wants.
Okay.
No one can resist his will. And everything that happens in the world and in the universe is either directly caused by God or indirectly caused by God via his permission, him allowing it to take place.
Okay.
So there's my, street definition. I don't know.
Street definition. All right.
Yeah.
The street definition.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, let's talk about the King of Redemption. This is verses 1-6. So this first verse always gets me every time I see it. Then Pilate took Jesus and flogged him.
Yeah.
All throughout this intercourse between Pilate and Jesus, he's going to be saying that there's no guilt in him.
Yeah.
And yet we see the cruelty of the Romans, right? Like, I find no guilt in him, but I'm gonna beat him anyway. I'm gonna send him to get beaten.
Yeah.
So this is unjust.
Yeah.
Right. Jesus is already experiencing a massive injustice, but this just highlights the cruelty of the Romans, that they have no qualms about severely. And I think we'll talk about it, severely beating someone, even if he hasn't done anything wrong.
I believe it's Luke. Luke tells us his strategy is that he'll punish him and then let him go. Apparently he thinks if he presents Jesus, as we'll see he is, they'll take pity on him.
Yeah.
And they'll be like, he's not a threat. They'll say, okay, don't crucify him.
Yeah.
So, not the case.
Yeah. So what is going into this process? Because this is just standard Roman procedure,
right?
When they're beating a prisoner. What are they doing?
So they strip you naked, tie you to a pole, and then they would take out their whip. They have this Roman whip that has like 9 or more leather ends on it, and then the inset in that would be pieces of metal, like think of like ball bearings or something like that, or smaller ball bearings. Or pieces of bone, just depends on whatever. And then, so these guys are just professional soldiers. So think about a guy like a Major League Baseball player swinging a baseball bat, except he's swinging a whip, and they whip you head to toe, literally from your heels to the top of your head. And then they would roll you over and do it on your stomach side. You're going to get it everywhere. And the historians record that when these whips hit, they hit with such force, they would completely lacerate your body open and sometimes rip away flesh so severely that your internal organs would be visible. And so they would whip Jesus like this, head to toe.
Yeah.
This would sometimes kill people.
Right.
They had orders apparently to stop before they got to that level, but this is the best explanation as to why Jesus dies so quickly on the cross, why he can't even carry his cross up the hill.
Yeah.
He's at this point already lost severe amount of blood.
Right.
And would be virtually unrecognizable as a human being.
Yeah.
His face swollen and beaten.
People have different opinions about the Passion of the Christ movie.
Yeah.
The Mel Gibson movie. I certainly had problems with people saying this is the greatest evangelical tool,
Right.
But it does give a very graphic portrayal of what's going on. I mean, the scene where they are flogging him is difficult to watch,
Right.
because of how historically accurate it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is what they're doing to him, as a prelude to Pilate bringing him out and saying, "I find no guilt in him."
Right.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's not in the text, but you got to think it's meant to be fear-inducing too to the Jews that have showed up.
Right.
Like, you're not going to disrespect Pilate.
Right.
This is the guy who's sent out into a crowd of people that were protesting him, soldiers dressed up like Jews, and started stabbing people in the back.
Yeah.
This is not a good guy.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't think because like sometimes Pilate is presented as this like limp-wristed guy.
Yeah.
He's a cruel person.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's sometimes he's presented almost like we should pity him for the position that the religious leaders are putting him in. They're all wicked. They're all pursuing their own means to an end.
Yeah.
Right. And Pilate is the same. He's not a good guy. I think it's in Luke where the people come and ask Jesus about the people that Pilate killed. In the temple, I think.
Yeah.
I think it's in the temple he killed some people.
Probably when he was robbing the treasury.
Right.
Because he robbed the treasury in order to build an aqueduct.
Yeah. Yeah. Good guy. Right. Really respected. I'm sure they all around they all appreciated each other. Yeah. But the soldiers do something even worse, right?
Yeah. So they got to have their fun. So the scene of him would be like just grotesque. It'd gross most people out.
Right.
So they weave together a crown of thorns. And these thorns, probably date palm thorns, they're like as long as a human hand.
Right.
Like 6 or 7 inches long, I guess.
Yeah.
And they weave together a crown of thorns, and they cram that on his head, and then they take off probably one of the soldiers' cloaks. It's purple, which is the color of royalty, and they put it on Jesus, and then they start to bow down and they genuflect in front of him, like you would if the emperor came to town. They start to bow down to him, and they're mock worshiping him. Hail the King of the Jews!
Right.
And they're having their fun in their games. They're striking him and stuff while they're doing this, and laughing, no doubt, laughing and having a great hysterical time. And it just shows again like how bad the human race is.
Right.
We're not basically good.
Yeah.
When God removes restraint off of a people, humankind runs rampant, does just unimaginable evils.
Yeah. I think you mentioned it in your sermon, but we also see God's grace in this situation. God should just destroy all of these guys.
Right.
Like, you laid your hands on the Son of God, and yet God he's merciful to them.
Right. Yeah.
All to accomplish his purposes.
Right.
Because what they're doing it's not random. Like, they don't just randomly say, "Hey, let's get some thorns."
Yeah.
How about we make, something to put on his head out of these thorns? Like, there's a purpose. There's a purpose behind their thoughts, right? Why they're doing it.
They're trying to make him look like Caesar. So Caesar on the Roman coin has this. It's called a radiant crown.
Yeah.
It's little spikes behind his head. You can look it up online and find them. And these little spikes, the Statue of Liberty might have a radiant crown. Does she have
that? Could be what? Yeah. Yeah. She definitely has the crown that has the spikes. Yeah.
So that's meant on the coin to reflect the glory of the emperor.
Okay.
That he's glorious, and it's almost like light or something.
Right.
I don't know, spikes. So they make a spiky crown, and they cram it on his head.
Right.
So they can laugh. So, look at their creativity.
Right.
They laugh and they mock him.
Yeah. But there's something else behind it, right?
Yeah. I mean, what's really behind it is It's either, like I said, the biggest coincidence ever and pure luck.
Right.
It can't, but it's not that.
Yeah.
God is guiding history to
Mhm.
unfold in this fashion,
Yeah.
I believe, because God is sovereign over human history, so that it will unfold in this way to communicate an explicit theological truth.
Mhm.
Like some connections in the Bible are there legitimately, but they're not so explicit. This one is like the most explicit ever.
Yeah.
Really. So it takes us back to Genesis 3. Genesis 3, Adam is a king. He's the king of all creation. That's really who he is. He's the head of the human race, representative of all humanity, and he's to rule God's creation under God as God's king. And he falls. The fall in Genesis 3, he fails, gives into temptation. Created order gets flipped upside down, and as a result of Adam's fall, the creation itself is cursed. So this is not just sin between Adam and God, like it spreads to everything God had made.
Right.
And God tells Adam, this is what God says to him: because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you. So thorns and thistles are a sign of the curse
Mm-hmm.
of the fall.
Right.
Of cursed creation. And so the Roman soldiers, unknowingly, they crown Jesus in glory as the king who is taking the curse of the fall upon himself.
Yeah.
So it makes an explicit theological picture, right? The best one. Can you even think of a better one?
Right.
That this second Adam, Jesus as the second Adam, the king of creation, the rightful king of creation, the head of the federal head of new creation, is taking upon himself not just the sins of all his people, he's literally taking on the curse of all of creation in order to redeem it.
Yeah. And, unless, people might think, you're kind of grasping at straws. I looked up thorns in a concordance, and this is a consistent picture of the curse.
Mm-hmm.
So in Deuteronomy, when the curses are being pronounced upon Israel for disobedience to the law, if they fail to keep the commandments, the land will no longer bear fruit for them; it will bear thorns. So and you see it all throughout the prophets, that this is a picture of cursing, thorns. And so I like that connection. I hadn't really thought about that before, but that was a really a great connection to see that Jesus is being crowned with the symbol of the curse.
And then Pilate brings him out. And just think about the image of what you would be seeing at this point.
Yeah.
You'd be seeing a human. He says, "Behold the man."
Right.
There's theological meaning to that too.
Mm-hmm.
That Jesus is a true man.
Yeah.
But he's bloodied head to toe. He looks like it's a spectacle, a wonder, a spectacle.
Right.
Beaten head to toe, bloodied, blood dripping, a crown of thorns, his face swollen, eyes probably barely open.
Yeah.
Looking like marred, like the image of God is totally marred.
Yeah.
Again, the truth that's communicated is so profoundly explicit.
Right.
Like this is what sin has done
to
the human race, and Jesus is the picture of it.
Right. Yeah. The scripture reading on Sunday was Isaiah 52 and 53, and as many were astonished at you, his appearance was so marred beyond human semblance, and his form beyond that of the children of mankind. This is the picture of Jesus being brought out, just disfigured, just as bloody pulp.
Yeah.
I can imagine, they put this, they beat him, they flog him, he's lacerated and bleeding, and then they put this robe on him. Then they rip this robe off of him, that just causes even more pain. And this is the picture of the Son of God doing this in the place of sinners.
Yeah.
It's astonishing. I mean, this is not human invention,
Mm-hmm.
right? This is, like you said, the sovereignty of God that is guiding human history to this point. And it's just the amazing grace
Mm-hmm.
that's found in Christ.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. So we have the King of Redemption. The next
And
section.
it's something to really dwell on too. Like,
It
before we
really
move on,
is. Yeah.
that God is in control of history.
Right.
Like history is unfolding according to God's plan to make you focus on this. That everything is about in the Bible is about Jesus.
Yeah.
And the only way all these lessons can be taught is if God is sovereignly in control of the things that are taking place.
Right.
And that doesn't stop after Jesus resurrects from the dead.
Right.
So it's important for us to know that so we can, when things are going on in our life, that we don't become anxious, that anxiety doesn't overcome us to the point of despair.
This is the worst thing that ever happened in history.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There's no comparison.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is infinitely the worst thing that has ever happened.
Yeah.
And God is sovereignly in control of everything that happens.
Mm-hmm.
So if this is the worst thing that's ever happened, and God is sovereign over it, that it's all happening according to his purposes and his plans, then we, as we experience lesser things, lesser evils, we can also be confident that God is sovereign,
right?
That he's guiding human history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Everything that's happening. I mean, I pity the people who, if they're allowed to, write history books about the last couple of years.
Right.
Because we're just seeing these massive historical things happen.
Yeah.
And it's easy to be overwhelmed by these things and think that it's all out of control, like you said. And yet God is in control. He's guiding history.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
All right. So the first section was the King of Redemption. We see Christ clothed in the signs of the curse. But he's actually redeeming his people.
Yeah.
The second section, verses 7 through 11, is we see the Son of God.
Yeah. And the title of this section just comes, from the text. They bring him back out, or he brings him back out, see there's no guilt in him, and they protest again. No, we have a law, and according to this law that he ought to die because he's made himself the Son of God. He's blasphemed by making himself
Let me
the Son.
ask you a question, and this is going to be just kind of speculation. Do you think Pilate is toying with them? Like he knows what they want. He knows why they want it.
Yeah.
Do you think that he's kind of playing with them at the same time? Like, he's a cruel guy.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's a little bit of that going on?
I think what he's doing is he's trying to. It could be that the Jews, they see themselves as so righteous, right? Above Gentiles,
right? You won't even come into my house,
right? And so he brings out a non-guilty man, and he makes them repeatedly demand publicly that what he says he's not guilty,
because Pilate doesn't have any qualms about putting to death an innocent Jew.
Oh no,
like
these guys are crucifying people left and right.
He's not going to be kept awake at night with a guilty conscience. I killed an innocent man. He's killed plenty of innocent people. In his climb up the ladder, he may have personally killed innocent people, right? I was just wondering what you thought about the interaction.
I think he's just trying to make them say it over and over publicly.
Yeah.
So he can expose them as not really being so righteous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't come into my house. Right. Yeah. All right. So they're still saying away with him.
Right.
They still are protesting. And now their real reason is coming out, right?
Right. Yeah. And you can see their reason is blasphemy. They're saying he's blasphemed by calling himself the Son of God. The law against this is Leviticus 24:16.
But Jay, we all know that Jesus never claimed to be God,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Isn't that a common argument?
Right.
Jesus never claimed
Yeah.
divinity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so this is their reason. Whoever blasphemes the name of Yahweh shall be put to death.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what they're saying. They're saying he's blaspheming Yahweh's name somehow. We don't have to go back and read this, but Jesus makes it very clear what he's claiming in John 5. In John 5, after they question him how he heals on the Sabbath, he pretty much says this: I work as the Father works. His work and mine are equal. I say what he gives me to say. Our words are equal. I have the authority to judge. He's giving me all authority to judge humanity. I raise the dead and give them life.
Mm.
So he's claiming explicitly equality with God.
Yeah.
And so they know it.
Yeah.
So there's really no question. They know what he's claiming.
At least twice in the book of John, they say you're making yourself equal with God.
Yeah.
Like the religious leaders know better than the modern day liberal.
Right. And he never denies
that's
what he's doing, because that's what he's doing.
Right.
Very clear fashion in a number of ways.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Now this is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I'm glad that you said that you kind of chased, this trail.
Right.
I'm glad you did, because the Jewish theological worldview should have room for this.
Yeah.
That he's claiming to be the Son of God.
Yeah.
He's claiming divinity.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, there's multiple persons in the Godhead.
Right.
And an honest look of the Old Testament scripture should make room for that, right?
It should. Yeah. And in fact, today, this is the way Jewish Christians, they will argue to Jews who deny Christ. They'll take them to the Old Testament and they'll show them the two Yahwehs in the Old Testament. Now, that might come as a shock to people to find out there are two Yahwehs in the Old Testament. And we've talked about it on here before, but it's explicitly seen in the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah.
That there are actually two Yahwehs in one narrative, like in one sentence. That Yahweh on earth rained down fire and sulfur from fire and brimstone from Yahweh in heaven.
Yeah.
So who's the Yahweh on earth? Well, if you trace it through the Old Testament, it becomes pretty clear that there's a physical manifestation of Yahweh not in the sense that in a human sense, but in the physical realm. Because you have to remember, Yahweh, the Trinitarian God, is outside of time, space.
Yeah.
Right? He's outside of time and space. He's totally separate from his creation. But whenever he communicates in this world, he will enter into this world in a physical way and talk to people. Not in like, oh, I heard a voice in my head, but like actually communicate with them. They sit down and talk to him, and he appears as a man when he does this. And this man figure is called the angel of the Lord.
Right. We've talked about this privately before. This probably would be a good free-for-all.
Yeah.
Just to talk about this. I think that at least growing up, really until the last several years, whenever it's said that the word of the Lord came to somebody, I would always picture like this disembodied voice.
Right.
But if you really examine the text, it seems like the prophets are seeing somebody.
Right.
Like someone is standing in front of them, talking to them. So the word of the Lord is coming to them. For instance, Genesis chapter 15, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Well, how can a word come in a vision, right? Later on in that same passage, this word of the Lord who came to Abram in a vision takes him outside. So there's somebody there. It's not a disembodied voice. Abraham's not just hearing a voice.
Right.
He's seeing somebody who's talking to him.
Yeah, and then in one case, he sat down and ate with him.
Right.
So he recognizes him when he comes the next time.
Right.
Like he knows who he's talking to.
Yeah.
So recognizable features. Moses encounters this person in the burning bush called the angel of the Lord. Then in the next instance, he's talking to Yahweh. And ask him his name. The name is revealed, Yahweh.
Yeah.
And so then the connection is made. The angel of the Lord carries the name of Yahweh. And he's in the pillar of fire This angel of the Lord, the text tells us, goes behind the Israelites, protects them from the Egyptians, like blocks them, and throws them into disarray. And then the next instance, that's Yahweh in the pillar. So they're the same person.
Right.
And Jude makes it clear who that person is. Surprise!
Right.
Who's the person?
Yeah.
Who's in the pillar? And Jude says it's Jesus, that Jesus rescued them.
Yeah.
So Jesus is, in the Old Testament, the angel of the Lord bears the name of Yahweh, reveals Yahweh. In the New Testament, Jesus bears the name of Yahweh and reveals Yahweh.
Yeah.
They're the same person. So
right. But they're rejecting this.
And they reject. Yeah.
They're rejecting this.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have a correct interpretation of the Old Testament.
Right.
But ironically,
yeah,
Pilate's theology.
Well, yeah, this is what's really ironic about this.
He does make allowance for this. There is room for this kind of idea in Pilate's theology.
Yeah. So Pilate, of course, is a pagan.
Mm-hmm.
He's Roman. He believes in the Roman pantheon of the gods. And in the Greek pantheon, the Roman pantheon, their gods visit men all the time in human form, and sometimes they have children with them. And these demigods walk the earth.
Right.
And so he takes it serious. It appears he's like he's kind of afraid. They say that he's the son of God, and he's like, well, hang on a second. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so his wife already had a bad dream, so he's already a little bit afraid anyway, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
And then he sees he's not guilty. He's talking about he's a king, and then here they are. They're saying he's some divine son of God.
Right.
So he takes it serious enough to examine him. So he takes him back in again, talks to him, examines him. This time Jesus won't say anything. He just stands there. And as he's just standing there, Pilate's like, hey, don't you know that I have authority to free you, or I have authority to crucify you? Like, don't you know I'm in charge here? I can do with you what I want. And then Jesus speaks up, and he says, the way he answers is, like, you're not really in charge.
Yeah.
You have no authority over me except for that which has been given to you from above. You can only do with me what's been given to you to do. You're not in charge here at all.
Yeah.
That's Jesus' answer. So it's an interesting answer to think about.
Right. Right.
Right.
So Jesus, again, is asserting God's sovereignty.
Right. Yeah. Over this whole situation.
Mm-hmm.
Pilate, the one who thinks he's in charge, isn't in charge.
Yeah.
Whatever he does because that's what God gave him to do.
So is Pilate a slave to God's
and that brings
sovereignty?
us up, right? That's the question. Does it bring up? Is he not guilty then, if he's doing what God has given him to do? And the answer is right here in the text. Therefore, he who delivered me over to you has the greater sin. Right? He's not saying you're alleviated from responsibility. He just says, look, there's categories of degrees of sin and guilt. You have some.
Mm-hmm.
Those who delivered me over to you have more.
Yeah.
Right? So Judas has more, possibly more than anyone, because he has been exposed to the greatest revelation of any of them. The next would be the leaders of the Jews, because they have revelation as well. Pilate, in comparison, doesn't have that level of revelation given to him.
Right.
But yet he still does. And I think it's Paul that says that Jesus gave a good testimony before Pilate.
Mm-hmm.
So there's more than what we're given in the text.
Yeah.
I think his testimony that he gave is enough to Pilate. He is a king, but not from this earth.
Right.
Right. His authority doesn't come from here. He has a different kingdom. And so he'll do exactly what God has given him to do. He's not really the one that's in charge of Jesus' history, of his life, and he still bears guilt for what he's about to do. So,
how do we understand this?
Well, so there's a theological term for it. We talked about it. It's called compatibilism. And all this really means is that God is sovereign over everything, even the sinful choices and decisions of men and their sinful actions. And yet, at the same time, men are accountable for what they freely do.
Is this just a theological category, or can we actually see this in the Bible?
Yeah, you can see it in the Bible, but the other thing to remember about this is that in this biblical view of God's sovereignty and man's responsibility, men act freely according to their nature. right? God doesn't put any evil inside the heart of man. He doesn't hold a gun to their head and make them do some evil, right? The people who act according to their own desires, and no one else is forcing them to do these things. And this is why it's called compatibilism, because it's the view that God's sovereignty over everything is compatible with man's free decisions that they make according to their own nature.
Mm-hmm.
And the story of Joseph is the most clear example.
Yeah.
Joseph and his brothers. And Joseph is the king of pretty much the world. He rules the world under Pharaoh, most powerful man in the world. His brothers had prior they had sold him into slavery. They wanted to murder him, then they changed their mind. Then they sell him into slavery, think they'll never see him again. And because of God's sovereignty over all of human history, right, he rises to this place of power and meets it back up with his brothers. Once the big reveal happens, his brothers are terrified. They're scared. They think, oh, now he's going to kill me. He's going to take revenge on us for what we did to him. And he tells them not to be afraid. You meant this for evil, but God meant it for good. Right? So you have God's sovereignty over everything, even the sinful decisions and actions of men. But in that action, God's overruling it, and God's sovereignty can never be divorced from his goodness. This is what has to be remembered, that God meant what they did for good. Not that he used it after the fact for good, but that he meant what they did for a great good, which was to save pretty much all of civilization at that time, and the Jewish people.
Yeah.
So it's there. I mean, it's in the Bible.
Yeah. Another example is Isaiah chapter 10 with Assyria. So Assyria, the king of Assyria has evil intentions in his mind, but he's doing what God wants him to do, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I like this example in Genesis chapter 20. It's a positive example. So we've been talking about God's sovereignty over evil, but he's also sovereign over the good things, I guess, that people do.
Yeah.
Abraham, he gives his wife away for the second time to Abimelech. He says, he tells her, say you're my sister. But God approaches Abimelech in a dream and says, you're a dead man because you've taken another man's wife. And Abimelech says, I haven't touched her. I haven't done anything that would make her impure. And God's response is, yes, I know that you have done this in the integrity of your heart, and it was I who kept you from sinning against me. Therefore, I did not let you touch her. So Abimelech hasn't touched Sarah, but God reveals that sovereignly it was him who was keeping him from doing that.
Yeah.
And then, you look at Acts chapter 2 and Acts chapter 4, where the apostles very clearly say that evil men are putting Jesus to death, but it's God who has predestined this to happen.
Right.
It's God's sovereign purpose.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what they preach. This is what the apostles preach. This is their preaching.
Yeah.
Right? That it's in Acts chapter 2. Men of Israel, hear these words. Jesus of Nazareth, a man tested to you by God with mighty works and wonders and signs that God did through him in your midst, as you yourselves know. This Jesus delivered up according to the definite plan and foreknowledge of God, you crucified and killed at the hands of lawless men.
Yeah.
So it's there clearly.
Right.
That's the early church preaching.
Yeah.
We shouldn't be ashamed of that teaching.
Yeah, we don't have to apologize for it.
Right.
Did Pilate do what God wanted him to do? Yes. Is he still guilty?
Yes.
Yes.
Right.
And we don't have to try to make some kind of excuse for either one of those.
Yeah, I mean, you just think about the alternatives to God being this way are not worthy of praise.
Yeah.
God would not be worthy of praise, right? So you would have a God who has plans that can be frustrated by evil men. So the illustrations I gave is one is some impotent God in the corner just wringing his hands, stressed and worried about like who's going to frustrate his plans next.
Right.
And then the other one is like God is a great chess master, and he's like, hey, I know evil men do things, and they're free to do them, but I'm the greatest chess master of all, and I can counter every move a human can make.
Yeah.
Because I'm that good at playing historical chess.
Right.
And that's not praiseworthy either.
Yeah.
Why would you praise that God? He can't stop anything bad from happening. Why would you pray? He can't. He said, well, God, save me from this. Well, I will if the pieces fall correctly. If I can
Yeah.
maneuver the pieces right,
Yeah.
and it works out best, then I will.
Yeah.
No, I mean, how can that help anybody that's dealing with issues and problems?
Right.
Things are going bad.
Yeah. Yeah. Just leaves God to be this excellent guesser.
Right.
And that's why the prophecies of the Old Testament are so specific, is because God he's really good at guessing.
Right.
Or just that he looks down through time
Mm-hmm.
and learns what they're going to do,
Right.
which we've talked about before. God doesn't learn anything.
He has an epistemistic time machine.
What? Did you just make up a word?
I just created a new category
Did
of
you?
words. But it works, right, George? Does it work?
I guess.
I better trademark that phrase.
Yeah. Write that down.
Epistemistic time machine.
Ed Litton's going to steal that if you don't. All right. Before we get into too much trouble, the third point here is the slave master of sin, and it's verses 12 through 16.
Yeah.
So Pilate is seeking to release him, but the Jews cry out, "If you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar."
Yeah. And this is it. This is what the one thing that they play. This is their
Uh-huh.
last card. They
Right.
know if they go at him here, they've got him, and they do.
Yeah.
He's this man has spent his entire life trying to climb up the social classes.
Mhm.
There's different stratifications, and you can climb your way pretty high. You'll reach a certain ceiling if you weren't born into specific families. But,
Right.
he apparently is in the equestrian class by now. Is that the correct word?
Equestrian.
Equestrian. There we go. He's politically ambitious.
Mhm.
His goal was not to be the, hey, I've reached my goal. I'm the governor of Judea now. Can't
Right.
go.
This kind of backwater.
Right. No doubt he would want to go to Rome and maybe eventually become a senator. Who knows?
Right.
But he wants to go as far as he can. And he apparently maybe has the title friend of Caesar. It's like an unofficial title.
Yeah, you got me researching this,
Yeah.
looking it up. This was, I guess, a title that would be given to these provincial governors.
Right. Yeah. Those that were shown to have been in allegiance, loyal to
Mhm.
Caesar.
Right.
And they say, you're not a friend of Caesar if you don't.
Right.
You got a man here claiming to be king.
And see, Pilate, he's already in the doghouse,
Right.
as it were.
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
he's already had some problems
Mm-hmm.
that is on Caesar's radar.
Right. Yeah.
And so he's at the same time he's trying to prevent a riot,
He doesn't want any more. Yeah.
because here's another black mark on his
Yeah.
his record, and so he's trying to avoid this because he could be demoted.
Yeah.
He could be brought back to Rome, not in a
Right,
good way, right?
Yeah. And apparently, that if it got back that you were disloyal, Caesar was a very suspicious person.
Mm-hmm.
Paranoid, maybe even. I mean,
Yeah.
I think all of the emperors were paranoid.
Probably.
Everybody's trying to be the emperor.
Right.
And easily, like, whatever, just I'm not even going to worry about it.
Mhm.
And how I'm not going to worry about it is just take care of him.
Yeah.
Get rid of him.
Right.
He's done.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's what they do. They say, they're threatening him. We're going to send word back that you're disloyal to
Yeah.
Caesar.
Here's a guy who's claiming to be king, and you had the opportunity to put him to death and you didn't.
Right.
Is something going on?
Yeah.
There's some kind of conspiracy.
Yeah. And so the slave master of sin for him is, he's politically ambitious.
Mhm.
Everything he does in his life, it is controlled by this one thing.
Yeah.
And he'll even kill innocent people to see it accomplished.
Yeah. He's got the fear of man.
Mm-hmm. And so that's controlling him, even, in this situation. He's
Right.
counting the cost. He knows Jesus is innocent,
Mm-hmm.
and he loves himself more than to do what's right and just.
Yeah. He even thinks this guy could be more than a man.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not in John's gospel. It's in Matthew's gospel that his wife has a dream
Yeah.
and sends him a note saying, "Have nothing to do with this man."
Right.
I think she says something like, "I've suffered greatly on his account in a dream." He's got them, saying he's made himself to be God, and even Jesus's response to him when he asked him, it probably
it
shouldn't fill him with much confidence.
It should stagger him a little bit,
right?
To say, I mean, who does that right before you're about to be crucified?
Yeah, like this guy he's not begging for his life. He's not.
Yeah.
He doesn't seem afraid.
Mm-hmm.
There's something different about this guy. He's not a normal prisoner here.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so you can just see how completely enslaved he is,
right,
to his own sin.
Yeah, he would rather kill, even in his own theology, if Jesus is a demigod.
Right.
He's still more willing to kill a deity than relinquish his control.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. And the Jews also reveal it. The leaders of the Jews, in particular, the chief priest. This statement that they make, he brings them back out. Behold your king. They keep crying out, crucify him, crucify him. And then the chief priest stands up, representing really the people, the nation. And this statement, I think it's one of the saddest statements in the Bible. We have no king but Caesar. Like these are supposed to be the people that are so loyal to Yahweh, right?
Right.
That they'll make hedge upon hedge around the law in order to not offend Yahweh.
Yeah.
And yet he'll say, we don't have any king but Caesar. We have no king but Caesar.
Which is just a complete lie, right? They hate the Romans.
Right.
They hate the Romans. If Jesus had come the way that they wanted him to come, as this conquering king, David coming to slay the enemy, that's what they wanted.
Yeah.
They would have easily rebelled against the Romans, but because he doesn't come the way that they want, they just lie. They lie about where their allegiance is.
Yeah. And the rightful king of the only true king of Israel is Yahweh, is their God. And this is in the Old Testament, you see it. This was God's plan for the nation. They tried to install Gideon as king, and he refused. He said, I'm not going to rule over you. God is to rule over you. And then later they demand a king again to Samuel, and they said, give us a king so we can be judged like the nations. And he's real upset by it. Apparently he's personally offended, and God tells the prophet, don't be offended. They've rejected me as their king. They haven't rejected you. They've rejected me. And so God, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? He graciously goes along with their wish to have a human rule over them. But the deal is like David, we get to David, the legitimate king, and his sons only are legitimate kings insofar as they are like vice regents ruling for Yahweh under his covenant.
Right.
So only insofar as they're faithful to the covenant are they legitimate kings under the kingship of the one true king. That's the way it's supposed to work. And it doesn't work like that very much.
No, it does not.
And so the Davidic line is legitimate, and the covenant made with David is that there's coming one of your descendants who will reign on your throne forever. And this is Jesus. He shows up. He is in the Davidic line, but surprise, he's also the real king of Israel.
Right.
He's Yahweh in the flesh. He's the real king of Israel. And he's standing there in front of them. Even Pilate tells him, there's so much like irony that's built into this, the way it plays out.
Right.
Behold your king.
Yeah.
Well, he's joking, but he's speaking the truth.
Yeah.
It's literally, think about it, the first time like the nation and the priest have seen altogether the physical manifestation of Yahweh, crowned in his glory. He's crowned in the curse.
Right.
But he's really there.
Yep.
It's their real king. And they say, we don't have a king. We have no king but Caesar.
Right.
And so we just see how deeply entrenched sin is, how it's affected them. And Jesus explains this in John chapter 5 as to why. And he explains it this way. It's because you love to seek the glory that comes from one another. Rather than seeking the glory of God, you seek the glory that comes from one another.
Yeah.
And therefore you can't believe.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you just in these 16 verses, you just see the depravity of man. You see the soldiers as they're mocking Jesus and beating him. You see Pilate, who he's confronted with who Jesus is, and he seems to at least partially, believe it. He seems more willing to believe it than the religious leaders, and yet he's still willing to hand him over to be crucified.
Yeah.
And then the religious leaders, who should know the Old Testament, they should know what the Messiah is going to be like, what he's going to look like, what he's come to do. Isaiah 53 was in their in their scriptures. They should have known this. They've seen Jesus' signs. They know that he's actually done these things, and yet they still are just hell-bent to murder him. And they're just completely ensnared in their sin.
Yeah.
But man is basically good, Jay.
Yeah.
And nothing you say is going to convince me otherwise.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And so we can see here, how does it connect to sovereignty, the sovereignty of God? I think we ought to realize that when you read the story, there is nothing different about you than these people.
Right.
Right? They're not some type of specially wicked human.
But it's easy to look that way, right? It's
Right.
easy to look at the religious leaders and say, well,
Yeah.
I wouldn't. If I had been there,
Right.
I wouldn't have done that.
Yeah. Yeah. You shouldn't look at the text and say, these are just representatives of the worst of humanity. They're just humans.
Right.
They're just humans.
Yeah.
That's all they are. Pilate's just a regular person, human. So are these religious leaders. They're just and humans are.
Pilate would have been a nobody if it hadn't been for the God sovereignly putting him where he is at this time.
Right.
Right? He's not someone that a history book is going to spend a lot of time on.
Right. Yeah. Who are the other governors of Judea? Nobody knows. Nobody cares.
Yeah.
And if it weren't for the grace of God and the sovereignty of God and salvation, we would do the same as they do. We would reject God, no matter the amount of revelation given to us. We would reject him. We'd still be rejecting him if he did not act sovereignly to free us from our sin.
Yeah.
If the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. Jesus says that after saying anyone who sins is a slave of sin. You can't free yourself from this condition. And so we see the depravity of man, and we should see ourselves in this and know and realize, if not for the grace of God, we would still be lost. So that's the idea.
Yeah, and that's a hard pill to swallow.
Yeah.
Especially for unregenerate man.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
He doesn't want to submit to this idea that he's enslaved to anything. And that's the same with the Jews. Because they say, unironically,
Yeah.
we've never been enslaved to anybody.
Right. Yeah.
And here their own chief priests, their rulers are saying we have no king but Caesar.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're just completely blinded. We talked about this on the podcast last Friday.
Yeah.
That this is man in his natural state. He is enslaved to sin. And
this is why Jesus says you must be born again.
Right.
He says, like to Nicodemus, religious, devout, we would call him moral. You can't even see the kingdom unless you're born again.
Right.
Something has to happen to you. Just like as drastic as when you were born physically, you've got to be reborn spiritually. And this is done by the work of the Holy Spirit. And if you think back to this clause in the beginning of John's gospel, you don't realize how important it is until you get to texts like this, right? And here's the passage. The true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. And so that is because, of course, God has to be sovereign over salvation.
Right.
You are not born again of your own will. You're born again of the will of God. He's the only one that can rescue out of that state that you're in.
So you brought the sermon full circle back to 9/11.
Yeah.
Which sent you to Iraq. Brought you back as just hardened in your unbelief.
Yeah.
Right.
That's right. Yeah. Like I said, didn't believe in God.
Yeah.
Because there's no proof of that. Right. I think people that call themselves atheists, they haven't thought through it correctly.
Yeah.
Because I think where you should go is that you're agnostic.
Yeah.
Agnostic, a nihilist, not believing in anything.
Right.
That God's, at least the God of the Bible, he's not real.
But that's not the end of the story, right?
Right. Yeah. So I think I didn't really truly even understand myself until that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And because I had a true knowledge of myself, I heard the gospel again eventually. And hearing the gospel again, God, I was born again, not of my own will. Right? I wasn't even thinking like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. I think I'll just become a Christian today.
Right.
Not at all. Just was born of God. Was confronted with the gospel, knew that I'm really a sinner. Not that I've committed like sins and that makes me a sinner, but that I've done, and everything I've ever done is because I'm a wicked person and deserving of God's wrath. That God is good, He's holy, and none of that happens unless 9/11 happens. It's interesting to look and see how all these things connect in your life.
Yeah,
God's sovereign over human history, even the evil intentions of men, and He was sovereign over my salvation. So
it's pretty awesome.
Yep.
Yeah, just I think we'll spend eternity just recounting the sovereignty of God.
Mm-hmm.
There are probably millions, probably billions of things that all fit together.
Yeah.
In this great tapestry that we individually just cannot see. But God is sovereign over all history and over the thoughts and intentions of man, the actions of even evil men, and He's going to accomplish His purposes in Christ.
Yep.
That's good. Yeah, so instead of arguing over God's sovereignty, we ought to glorify God over His sovereignty. So thank you for joining us today for Text Driven Tuesday, and I hope that this has been beneficial for you. Jay, you're taking a break now, aren't you?
Yes.
I'm excited, buddy.
Going Hebrews next,
I'm excited. Right? We're going to start Hebrews. Yeah. All right. Well, if this has been beneficial for you, please like, subscribe, share, get the word out, and hopefully this helps you to become more and more conformed to Christ.